It's time for two guys that you should never give up for Lent. That's right, listen to all their podcasts for your spiritual well-being. This is Drew Entz and Clayton Payne, and we are Beyond Sunday Morning. Tonight's special guest, the Reverend Taylor Mertens. Welcome to our podcast, Beyond Sunday Morning. We are excited to be here, and I'm joined, as always, with my special boy, Clayton Payne. Clayton, how are you doing this morning?
Doing pretty well. With an intro like that, I don't know what else I can say.
Especially since it's the middle of the afternoon.
It is. I realized that as we were doing this. But, anytime I see Clayton Taylor, this is just a special day, because he's my special boy. I mean, look at that smile. His rosy cheeks and his red hair.
And he's got the communion chalice right over his shoulder, making, everyone know the importance of his Eucharistic tendencies.
Right, and his little collar, It's all important,
Absolutely.
So proud.
Absolutely.
So proud. So Clayton, why don't you introduce our guest?
Well, we are joined by Reverend Taylor Mertens, one of the Stanton District pastors, and just an all-around good guy. There are so many different things we could tell about Taylor, but we'll let one thing set him apart today, because hopefully he'll be able to join us for another episode sometime and tell us a little bit more about himself then. But I think the one thing that sets him apart is he's a big Star Wars nerd.
I am.
And I do want to say that I went looking for Taylor Mertens one day, and we happened to be in the park together, but I did not find Taylor Mertens. I found Chewbacca instead.
This is true. That was my Halloween costume for the big trunk or treat that all the Stanton city churches did, and every single child that came knew who I was and asked me to do the Wookiee call.
It's perfect.
And it was. I think it was.
It's really good.
Yeah,
it's really good.
That's good. And we now know that you're talented in at least something.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sure many things, but that's one more thing than Clayton is.
Yeah.
So you guys are in competition with one another, right? That's how that works if you're pastors in the same area?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we can see each other's steeples. Well, actually, you're on the other side of a hill, so I can't really see you. But, Stanton's a unique place. There are 87 churches in the city limits of Stanton, which is rather remarkable. And I always hear, though I have no way to prove it, that there are more churches per capita here in the city of Stanton than anywhere in the United States.
Wow. And they're lucky to have you.
Us, both of us. Yeah.
Well, no, they're lucky to have you. Clayton's just there.
Thank you.
He is. Tell me something that makes you feel like that Clayton's a special guy.
That Clayton is special?
Yeah.
Well, that's easy because it's my favorite story about Clayton. Soon after Clayton was reappointed to his church, Cherryville United Methodist Church, we were part of a discipleship circle that got together once a month, and we would switch between Clayton's church and the church I serve. And we'd have communion, and we'd share accountability questions. And of course, like all good Methodists, the real heart of what we talked about actually didn't happen in the office, but in the parking lot after we met together.
Of course.
And so it was I think it was maybe the first time we got together, and everyone had left except Clayton and I were still talking, and we were doing what you're supposed to do, and we were giving the elements back to the earth. We were spreading the bread and pouring out the grape juice. And as Clayton was doing this, he screamed because he looked down under his feet and he was standing on a snake that slithered underneath his foot, and he just yelped. I was already in my car. I could hear him screaming from inside my car, and I could only think about how Adam and Eve must have felt that first time they encountered the snake, and that it was happening here at Clayton's Blessed Church.
There you go.
That was also a special occasion for me because I taught the surrounding neighborhood new words.
Yeah, new words that are not often said in church.
Absolutely, it was a fantastic moment for myself. Well, the reason we have you on, Taylor, today is because we're going to talk a little bit about Lent, and Lent is coming right around the corner, just in a handful of days, actually. So I wanted to ask this first question. What comes to mind when you hear that word?
When I hear the word Lent?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, it's my favorite liturgical season of the year. And so I kind of get a little excited. And that's kind of strange because of what the season implies and what it carries with it. But as soon as I hear it, I get I get a little excited in the sense that it's a time to build up to something really remarkable. And what we talk about generally in Lent is, in my opinion, something that we miss during the rest of the year, and it's something we all need to hear. And it's the words we share on Ash Wednesday in 2 days, and it's, we say formally, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. But what we're really saying is, you're going to die. That's pretty hard stuff to handle and to hear. But I think we really live in a culture now that pretends that death isn't real. So any time that we can speak that kind of truth in church, it makes me excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things too, just with Ash Wednesday, is the idea that we're not perfect. And I think that's something else, is that, that we do need to repent for our sin. And that's something that isn't popular, again, in our culture today. So I appreciate that, Taylor.
Yeah, one of my favorite seasons is also Lent. I love Holy Week in particular, and I think one of the things that I love about it is there's not an opportunity in the church calendar such as that you experience in Lent to lead the people in experiential forms of renewal, where they can actually experience something. We experience it in ashes on foreheads, in the practice of fasting and almsgiving, and we experience it every Sunday as we prepare ourselves for Easter. And it is truly a beautiful season, and one that's often usually kind of referenced as a sad season, but I think it's really this chance for us as a people to renew ourselves. So, Taylor, I wanted to ask you, tell us a funny story about your practice of Lent, or maybe something you've experienced along the way or seen in another, but share a funny story with us.
Okay, so I've been doing this whole pastor thing now for 2.5 years, and I was appointed and started serving in like the last week of June, and so it was ordinary time. We got through that. We did Advent, had a great time. We had Epiphany and had a great time. And then all of a sudden, I keep looking at the calendar, and it's my first Ash Wednesday service. It's getting really excited, what we were going to do, what we were going to talk about. And then I asked someone at the church where they keep the ashes. And they looked at me like, that's your job, that's your responsibility. And so I don't even remember who I called, a couple pastors. I said, hey, do you order your ashes on Cokesbury? I mean, where do these ashes come from? Because I had never learned or kind of appreciated the fact that the ashes come from the previous year's palms, from Palm Sunday, which, of course, we didn't have my first year. They didn't save them. So I did what any good pastor would do. I lit a fire in the fireplace at the parsonage, and I collected all the ashes from it, and I used those for Ash Wednesday because I didn't know what else to do. So it was funny because for as much as I've enjoyed it my whole life and kind of appreciated that time to get together and to mark ourselves with this cross, I never, one, took the time to even think about where the ashes came from. And then secondly, I never heard from the church where they came from. And I think that transition, that juxtaposition between Palm Sunday and the ashes is so important and so vital. And it made me really appreciate it in a funny way because I had no idea where they came from.
That's a funny story. Clayton, do you have one that you want to share?
Actually, mine kind of involves Taylor. It's actually a Good Friday story. But Taylor has a practice, and I don't know how many years you've been doing it for now, Taylor.
You tell the story? I mean, why don't you tell your part of it, and then I'll tell the rest of it.
I like this. And the part I appreciate is that he's talking about Holy Week like we're not going to have another show at all between now and Holy Week. So go ahead, Clayton.
Hey.
Tell us your Holy Week story.
So I happen to be going into lunch, and Taylor has this tradition that he does. Taylor, would you tell us what your tradition is?
Right. So I got to go back a little ways. When I was in seminary, I helped out a church that was in Birmingham, Michigan. And while I was there, they had me help a church that was in the inner city of Detroit. And it was this huge church. It was called Cassiani Methodist Church. And in its heyday, hundreds of people on Sunday. And it's basically abandoned like lots of Detroit is now. But when I went, I saw this incredible organ, and hanging above the altar is this giant wooden cross. In the bottom right corner, it is just completely torn up. I mean, everything else is perfect, but this one corner. And so I asked the pastor there, and she told me that every year they take it down and they take turns dragging it through the city of Detroit. And every year, a little more of the cross gets worn and knotted and kind of torn apart. And so I promised myself then that when I got appointed somewhere, if I was so blessed to, that I would build a cross, and I would either try to encourage lay people to join me and carry a cross around wherever I was, or I would do it myself. So for the last 2 years, and I'll do it again this year, I get a cross, a big, not quite one that you could actually crucify someone on it, but pretty large. And I throw it over my shoulder, and I walk around Stanton on Good Friday for about 4 to 6 hours.
Wow.
So what Clayton's talking about is that last year when I was walking around downtown, he was at his favorite restaurant, and he and his wife and Cody and his son came out and saw me while I was walking on the street, and they just started shouting at me. And it wasn't very kind, and I didn't know who it was at first because they were heckling me, kind of like Jesus was, I guess. I think maybe that was his point, or he was just being himself.
Thank you. That's my guess. It's just Clayton being Clayton.
Yeah. But what's been really interesting about it is the first year I did it, when I left from the church and just started walking around, I was excited to see what kind of reaction I might get from people, from anybody. And I got nothing. No one honked their horns. No one waved. No one stopped to talk to me about what I was doing. In fact, I remember walking down Beverly Street, and I saw people walking toward me, and they jaywalked to get to the other side of the street to avoid me so that we wouldn't actually come into contact with each other.
Sure.
The only dialogue I had was with a guy on a street corner, and we were standing like shoulder to shoulder, and he looked at the cross, and he looked at me, and he muttered under his breath, "Jesus H. Christ." And I, being the horrible pastor that I am, said, "Oh, actually, it's Taylor C. Mertens, but I really appreciate the compliment."
That's funny.
And then fast forward a year, last Good Friday, I got the same cross out. I went on the same route, the same day of the year, and it was a completely different experience. Everyone wanted to talk to me. People were honking. People were shouting really kind things. People were shouting horrible things. Someone threw up the middle finger toward me. Someone told me to get off the road, and it was just a completely different experience from one year to the next, including Clayton heckling me from a restaurant downtown.
So, and basically hold on real quick, Clayton. What I just heard was everyone else was really nice to you except for Clayton and his family.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I have to tell you how I lived the moment. I lived the moment. I was going to lunch, and I remember, you have to understand, downtown Stanton is building to building. So, there's really nowhere for the sound to escape. And I remember seeing Taylor, and I thought, well, I'll just shout at him. And I remember shouting something like, "Hey, you," really loudly. And I forgot how loud my voice can be sometimes, because most of the street turned and looked. And I remember feeling immensely awkward because Taylor turned and looked as well after about the third time that I did it. And
I'm pretty sure you yelled, "What do you think you're doing?"
That was it.
This is the best story ever.
And it was like horrible timing, because I just encountered this woman on the street who saw the cross, and she walked up to me and she started crying. And she asked me, she said, like, "What's going to happen to me when I die?" And it was this moment that I had to, try to share good news with her. And no joke, there's this redheaded man screaming at me, "What do you think you're doing?" And I'm trying so hard to connect with this woman and bring her a sense of peace while trying to ignore Clayton with every fiber of my being.
And that's what most of us try to do, is ignore Clayton with every fiber of our being.
So it is a funny story for me, and one that is a cautionary tale. When you see someone carrying a cross on Good Friday, you don't necessarily need to yell at them.
It's true.
Wow, that was a great story. We're gonna isolate this, and we're gonna make this into something. I appreciate it.
It's just gonna be a whole podcast, a recurring clip.
We're just gonna. I'm gonna start asking you when you're talking, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Yeah,
just mess you up. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Doing
Thank you. Well, Taylor, and
now, do I get to tell a funny story, or is it just about you, Clayton?
Fine, you can tell a funny story.
So we were. I'll be. I don't have as much history and all, but when I was growing up in high school, I went to a Catholic high school, and I would forget every week that on Friday that they wouldn't have any meat.
Yeah.
And it was really frustrating because I would like be in the mood for a hamburger, and I would show up and it would be like vegetable soup. And I remember actually complaining one time, and then I had to sit down and be told by the campus minister why we don't have meat on Friday. And I go, I hear you. I just want a hamburger. That's
Did they not like regularly articulate it?
No, they did. I just didn't. I just wanted a hamburger.
Yeah.
And I was in high school.
Yeah.
And so that, and then I have an Ash Wednesday one where we forgot to put oil into ashes.
Oh yeah, I was hoping one of you had a story like that. Let's keep going. This is good.
And we had trumpet slide oil underneath the pulpit because our pastor played the trumpet, and so it's just secretly we put slide oil in the ashes, and it was gross.
Yeah.
It did not mix like olive oil. It's not appropriate. It smelled bad. It was just bad all the way around. So,
Do you know what happens if you use water instead of oil?
Oh, please. Go ahead and tell us.
If you mix the ashes with water and then you mark people their foreheads and then you wash it later, there is still a red cross because it actually burns your skin.
Yeah.
I haven't done that, but I know some pastors who have. So that's.
If you get nothing else from this podcast, when you see Clayton talking to anyone, scream out, "Hey, what are you doing?" And
Absolutely.
2, don't mix water with your ashes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, along that subject line, what do you think people should know about Lent this year as they begin to practice?
This year, like in particular?
Yeah. I think it's always interesting because today, Drew and I were talking earlier, and one of the things I talked to him about was it seems interesting to me because you see culture around us kind of shifting gears for Lent. I see signs for fish sandwiches everywhere. I've seen articles that the Pope is quoted in talking about not giving up chocolate or anything else, but really taking on acts of mercy. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just kind of curious from your two's perspective, what do you think we need to know about practicing Lent this year, and how do we keep it holy?
Sure, man. That's a great question. I think one is a big thing is just to have an appreciation for it, kind of like we started talking about what we do during the season and embracing it for what it is, not using it as an excuse to just do, kind of like a sermon series or whatever you want, or to focus on one particular aspect in the life of the church. I mean, this is supposed to be a season of renewal. And so to embrace it for what it is, I think is really important. But then, I don't know, I think a big thing for me in our current culture is recognizing who we are and whose we are. Like Clayton wears a collar. I tend to wear a collar occasionally, especially when I'm, working at a coffee shop downtown, because it forces me to act like a Christian. If I'm dressed like this, I can really be kind of whoever I want, and no one publicly is going to know who I am or who I belong to, that kind of thing. And so that's my big thing with people during Lent is, especially those who come to Ash Wednesday, which is, not as many people that come to church on Sunday morning, but I try to impress upon them, for this day, you're going to have to act differently whether you think about it or not. I mean, because everyone's going to look at your forehead and they're going to know what you really believe. They might not be able to articulate it, but they're going to see that you're different. What would the next 40 days actually be like if you kept acting like that mark was on your forehead, even though it's going to eventually fade away? I think, if anything, it's a very short and finite time for us to truly live out our faith between Sunday to Sunday and not letting our faith just be a 1 hour a week kind of thing.
Along that subject line, in my first appointment, I had always wanted to dabble with the idea of wearing a collar. I hate ties, and I thought it was a beautiful symbol of accessibility. And I always felt really awkward. I know Drew's laughing about this over here. We have very different viewpoints on this, but
you're special.
I remember feeling awkward when I wore it places. When I was in the hospital or any place else, I just remember feeling really out of place. And I decided that for Lent, I was going to wear it for the whole entire season of Lent. Wherever I was when I left the house, I was going to wear it. And it did just that. It made me aware of the things that I did, the way I drove, the way I acted in public, even to the way I tipped. I had to be aware of the fact that I was proclaiming myself to be a member of Christ's church. And it really it wasn't giving up candy or chocolate. It was about an act of doing something different. Drew, do you have maybe one that you'd like to share with us?
First off, please tell me you were wearing a collar when you were yelling at Taylor, because that would have been really funny.
Oh, he definitely.
I probably was.
Yeah, for sure.
Such a different way to act. The guy with the collar yelling at Jesus. I think for me at least, one of the things that kind of is important about Lent, and you both have touched on it, is the idea of there's something different. You know, part of being Methodist is we believe in sanctifying grace, that we're on a journey towards perfection and love. And I think sometimes just by giving up chocolate or giving up a TV show, or we miss the point. The point is to go and to fill that space with something else. Fasting isn't just about getting rid of something, but it's about filling that time with something that honors God and centers us more with Christ. And I think in some ways, even looking at what we do for Lent, I think that that's an important thing. I would much rather see people add something to their life than take something away. I think, for example, of the story, the parable Jesus talks about a demon that's sent out to a waterless region. It comes home and finds its house swept and in order, and invites 7 more demons more powerful than itself. And I think in some ways that's kind of what we do sometimes when we think about Lent, is we just want to get rid of something, and we don't fill it with something that is Christ-like, something that honors God and invites the Holy Spirit to be a more part of our life. And that's really what Lent is. Lent is about preparing ourselves for Easter, for this good news. And so that would be one thing I would just suggest to people, is go ahead and look for something that helps you to grow closer to God. Try it for 40 days, whether it's wearing a collar, or if you're clergy, or maybe spending an extra 5 to 10 minutes in prayer, or doing a devotional, etc., etc. But make it about, I'm going to try this for 40 days with the goal that this is going to be something that I continue to do even after Lent.
Yeah, I read a devotional for the church every week, and it goes out on Mondays. And one of the lections for this week is about, don't be pious for the sake of other people. And I wrote about that today, and I wrote to everybody about how I remember being in seminary, we called Lent spiritual Olympics, because everyone wanted to compete about the things they were giving up. Someone would say, oh, I'm giving up chocolate, Drew, like you said, or I'm giving up meat, or I'm giving up television. And everyone was trying to outdo everyone else. And I was guilty of it. I mean, I loved telling people how faithful and holy I was going to be. And so the end of the devotional this year that I sent out just this week to everybody right before the start of Lent was to say, why not give something up or add something like Drew's talking about, and then not tell anybody that you did it? How hard? I mean, that's hard to do, because it's not very gratifying. It's not very, you don't get that instant gratification or that kind of respect from people, but it's probably a whole lot holier if you do something for God and not for your own self-righteousness.
Taylor, maybe one of my questions, and really probably our closing question for today, is what are some suggestions you could name for us, for those that are kind of new to this whole practice of giving something up or taking something on? What are some suggestions that you might have, some relatively easy things that would be some changes that would be beneficial for a person's spiritual life?
Yeah, I always encounter people who say, I'm going to read the Bible in 90 days, like very new Christians. Like, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to get the whole thing. I'm going to absorb all of it. And I try not to laugh, but if you try to read the Bible in 90 days, you're not going to remember what you read. I always try to say to people, hey, why not just pick one psalm and read that same psalm every day for 90 days?
Yeah.
One of the things that we're going to be doing this Sunday, we're going to be talking about Adam Hamilton's book, The Way, and we're going to be using that throughout Lent. But he talks about how at his church, for college students, when they go off to college, they make a laminated little piece of paper with like a rubber band on it, and they want them to hang it over their shower heads. That says, it's a prayer that they're supposed to say when they get in the shower in the morning. It says, Lord, as I wash myself with this water, I remember my baptism. Cleanse me, renew me, that I might do your will. Amen. And so I kind of took that and I made little laminated things that are going to go by people's faucets that just says, Lord, as I wash my hands, I remember my baptism. I give you thanks, and I pray that you would renew me and cleanse me. because I think we tend to overcomplicate church. We tend to overcomplicate what Lent means. We try to fill sermons and Bible studies with all this information when not that it's easy, because it's certainly not, but I would start off with something a little more straightforward and simple and to the point, like saying that little prayer every time you wash your hands. It takes 10 seconds, but it will help to create some sort of habit that will bear fruit in your life, instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to go way over the top, and by the end Lent's over, I'm going to have read, from Genesis to Revelation and be this expert.
Drew, do you have something that you want to add, some idea?
Well, and maybe I'm just going to talk, I'll talk to clergy as well as laity. I think going back to something you said, Taylor, was to actually go out and explain some of the things and the reasons why we do what we do. I had a conversation this past week with somebody, I'm a lectionary preacher, because I think it's important to not just pick my own verses, but to really wrestle with God's word, and to have something bigger than myself. They didn't know what the lectionary was.
Yeah.
I mean, and it goes back to your ashes from Ash Wednesday, and I think that there's so much tradition, so much holiness, and I'll be the first to say I'm not the most liturgical person in the world. I'm not the most liturgical pastor in the world, but I think that there is something beautiful about the tradition that we have that grounds us in the midst of everything going on. I once heard someone talk about a garden, and, the tradition is being part of the garden. It's not just picking and choosing whenever I want.
Yeah.
And so to kind of recognize that Lent goes back, 1,700 years to the Council of Nicaea, and really understand that we're a part of something bigger. We're part of a tradition that's bigger and more vast than any of us. And we should appreciate that we can be a part of that garden.
I had the privilege of getting to know Father Mario. He was a Catholic priest in a neighboring community, and one of the things we would often sit and talk, and we'd have theological discussions. I said to him one day, what was he doing special in the season of Lent? And I'll never forget his wise answer to this young clergy that was sitting next to him. He said, I'm doing the same thing I did last year. And I said, well, what is it? And he goes, prayers, fasting, and almsgiving. And that was his understanding. The faithfulness of the community was based in these acts. And when I asked him to say more, he talked about fasting as not giving up something, but maintaining something. And he talked about prayer as being in more communication with God. And he talked about almsgiving, about acts of mercy and justice, and about caring for those who Jesus cared about. And I was just struck by his desire not to make something new and shiny, but his desire to be faithful to what was already established. And I just thought it was beautiful to sit there and see that great wisdom. Well, Taylor, thanks for joining us today. Is there some way that we can find you, that people can find you? Are you on? Do you have a Twitter handle? Something that?
Are you more in the 21st century than Clayton is? That's what he's asking.
Not more in the. I don't have an Apple Watch, and I don't drive an electric car. But I'm trying to keep up with Clayton in many ways. No, I mean, I have a website. It's www.thinkandletthink.com, taken from John Wesley himself. And I have all my sermons that I've ever preached and all the devotionals I've ever written available on that website. So that's probably the easiest thing.
It's awesome.
Fair enough.
Clayton, where can the good people find you?
At Clayton Payne on Twitter, or Clayton W. Payne on Facebook.
Facebook is so last century. I'm just at Drew Entz on Twitter. So we appreciate. Thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both.
And we appreciate it. And subscribe, help tell friends. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you later.